The House voted Friday to expel indicted New York GOP Rep. George Santos over ethics violations, making him only the sixth lawmaker ever to be ousted from the chamber. The resolution passed 311 to 114, with 105 Republicans voting in favor of expulsion. All four top House GOP leaders voted to keep Santos in Congress. The embattled lawmaker survived previous attempts to remove him, but there was growing momentum for the latest effort in the wake of a scathing ethics report, which concluded Santos sought to exploit his House candidacy for personal profit. Santos announced he would not seek re-election after the report, but refused to resign. The House clerk is expected to assume control of Santos' office and Democratic New York Gov. Kathy Hochul will need to schedule a special election to replace him. Expulsion is the most severe form of punishment for a House lawmaker and requires the high bar of two-thirds majority vote to succeed. Santos is the first member to be expelled from the House in more than 2 decades and the first to be ousted since the Civil War who wasn't first convicted of a felony. Israel has resumed combat operations against Hamas in Gaza, accusing the militant group of violating its agreement. Hamas denied Israel's claims. The resumption came moments after the 7-day truce between the sides expired. The pause in fighting allowed the release of civilian hostages from Gaza and Palestinian detainees from Israeli jails. Some of the areas where Israel is conducting offensive operations in Gaza include southern parts of the Strip, the Israel Defense Forces said. The military also dropped leaflets in the southern city of Khan Yunis Friday, calling it a fighting zone, and telling residents to evacuate. Negotiations with Qatari and Egyptian mediators over the release of hostages are continuing despite the resumption of hostilities. No aid trucks crossed into Gaza after the truce ended, an eyewitness at the Rafah crossing. An Italian court has sentenced more than 200 crime gang members to a total of 2,200 years in prison, following the country's largest mafia trial in 3 decades. During the trial, which began in January 2021 and took place in a purpose-built bunker in the southern Italian town of La Terme, more than 400 lawyers represented the defendants and some 900 witnesses provided testimony. A panel of 3 judges, who had been deliberating the fate of the 338 accused since the trial ended on October 16, delivered their verdict Monday. It took the court 1 hour and 40 minutes to hand down its rulings, Italian news outlet ANSA reported. Some 207 mobsters were jailed and more than 100 were acquitted. The total jail time includes 5 life sentences and 3 30-year sentences. Among those tried were 42 women, a record for a mafia trial, of whom 39 were convicted. Many of the defendants had colorful nicknames, including the Wolf, Fatso, Sweetie, and Lamb Thigh, that were caught on some 24,000 wiretaps, according to the testimonies presented during the trial. The convicted include the one-time Forza Italia lawmaker Giancarlo Pitelli, former police chief Giorgio Naselli, former financial police officer Michele Marinaro, ex-mayor Gianluca Calippo, and the former regional councillors Luigi Incarnato and Pietro Giambarino. The mobsters were affiliated with Italy's notorious 'Ndrangheta crime group and were convicted of mafia association, extortion, bribery and 5 murders. The trial was referred to as the Rinascita Scott, named after the United States Special Agent Scott W. Zeben, who was credited with uncovering ties between Colombia's cartels and the 'Ndrangheta. Based in the southern Italian region of Calabria, the 'Ndrangheta is considered to be the most powerful mafia group in the country, and one of the most powerful criminal enterprises in the world, with thousands of members and affiliates globally, according to the Italian DIA, Anti-Mafia Directorate. It has a monopoly on European drug trafficking, according to Europol. The 3 judges had been living under police protection during the trial, which lasted 2 years and 10 months. Fresh gunfire was heard in a suburb of the Sierra Leonean capital, Freetown, on Tuesday as security forces combed through the city in search of suspects linked to a jailbreak and a foiled attack on a military barracks that left more than 13 people dead. Residents of Freetown said on social media that a fresh round of gunshots was heard on Tuesday afternoon in the Murraytown suburb. Sierra Leone's information ministry said no one was hurt during the shooting. As part of ongoing operations to apprehend those responsible for the incidents of November 26, a few shots were fired around the Murraytown barracks vicinity, the ministry said in a statement Tuesday. The person of interest has been arrested and is now in custody of the security forces, it added. Freetown-based journalist Amaru Fofana also said in a post on Facebook that in the Kingdom area of the city, the presence of soldiers, caused panic on Tuesday as they moved to recapture fleeing inmates who are believed to be hunkering down around the slums in the area. Police in the West African nation have launched a manhunt to recapture dozens of fleeing inmates who were set free after armed men stormed a prison and other detention centers in Freetown early Sunday. 13 soldiers were killed in action, Sierra Leone's army spokesman Colonel Issa Bangura told CNN Tuesday of the botched attack on the army base. 8 soldiers were wounded and 3 assailants were arrested, Bangura said, adding that the death toll could be as high as 20. A police statement said some of the inmates who escaped during the jailbreak have turned themselves in but did not provide the number of prisoners who fled. Prison officials estimate that the number of fleeing inmates could be above 1,800. A cash reward has been offered for tip-offs leading to the arrest of either the assailants or prison escapees. A nationwide curfew was imposed following the series of attacks on Sunday, leading to widespread flight disruption at the Freetown International Airport. Authorities reviewed the curfew hours on Monday, saying it would now run from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. daily local time, until further notice. Airport operations will be conducted within the parameters of the revised curfew times, the country's aviation authority said. An indigenous community has won a court battle to regain ownership over its ancestral homeland in the Ecuadorian Amazon, more than 80 years after they were displaced because of war. An Ecuadorian appeals court backed the Yatiyäwinakapa nation's claim over Pequia, a biodiverse territory in northeast Ecuador along the border with Peru, according to a court ruling provided to CNN by Amazon Frontline, a non-profit organization working with indigenous people to defend their land rights. The Yatiyäwinakapa were displaced during the Peru-Ecuador War in the 1940s. Last September, the community, which has only about 800 members, filed a lawsuit against the Ecuadorian state, claiming it was violating their right to ancestral property, Amazon Frontline said. In its ruling on Friday, the Provincial Court of Sucumbíos gave Ecuador's Ministry of Environment 45 days to deliver a property title to the Yatiyäwinakapa people for more than 104,000 acres of land, court documents show. This is a historic moment for the Yatiyäwinakapa nation, said Elias Piuahe, president of the Yatiyäwinakapa nation of Ecuador. The land of Pequia has always been and will always be ours. For over 80 years, we have been fighting to get our land back. The ruling will mark the first time that the Ecuadorian government delivers a land title to an indigenous community whose ancestral territory is found in a protected area, Amazon Frontline said, adding it sets an invaluable precedent for all indigenous peoples fighting to recover their lands across Latin America and the world. Piuahe said, "We are fighting for the preservation of our culture on this planet. Without this territory, we cannot exist as Yatiyäwinakapa people." The death of Henry Kissinger on Wednesday saw the loss of a diplomat Beijing has long considered a trusted friend, with China's foreign ministry on Thursday hailing the former American Secretary of State as a pioneer and architect of China-US relations, for his central role in the establishment of bilateral ties. Paying tribute to the late statesman during a regular press briefing, ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin said, "The Chinese people will remember Drive Kissinger's sincere devotion and important contributions to China-US relations." Chinese leader Xi Jinping had sent his condolences to President Joe Biden, Wang added. Kissinger's death was also mourned on Chinese social media Thursday, where his passing became the top trending topic on heavily moderated microblogging site Weibo with more than 400 million views. "Farewell, old friend of the Chinese people," said a top comment with thousands of likes. "The person who started a period of history has finally become history," another comment said. Considered a highly influential but controversial figure in the United States and around the world, Kissinger is highly regarded in China for his role laying the groundwork for the formation of diplomatic relations between Beijing and Washington, a crucial and highly consequential step in the country's re-engagement with the world. In July 1971, Kissinger became the first high-ranking U.S. official to visit Communist China. His secret meeting with Chinese leaders paved the way for then-President Richard Nixon's breakthrough trip the following year. That visit, in turn, opened the door for the normalization of ties between the world's richest country and its most populous in 1979. There is no more important diplomat in the 20th century than Henry Kissinger, certainly with regard to U.S.-China relations. He has left an indelible mark, said Scott Kennedy, senior advisor in Chinese business and economics at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, think tank in Washington. Long after Kissinger left office, Beijing had regarded the well-connected diplomat as a potential helping hand in navigating the increasingly hawkish views towards China in Washington. Amid fraught relations in recent years, Chinese state-controlled media has celebrated former diplomat in an apparent signal of their displeasure with the tougher stance taken by U.S. administrations. In a statement Thursday, Chinese ambassador to the United States, Xi Feng, said he was deeply shocked and saddened to learn of Kissinger's passing. History will remember what the centenarian had contributed to China-US relations, and he will always remain alive in the hearts of the Chinese people as a most valued old friend, Xi said on social media X. Chinese state media highlighted Kissinger's friendship with China, noting that he visited the country more than 100 times over half a century. State broadcaster CCTV called him a living fossil, who witnessed the development of US-China relations. Many state-run outlets cited a glowing quote from Kissinger's interview with official news agency Xinhua in 2011. China is the country with which I have the longest and most in-depth contacts. China has become a very important part of my life. Chinese friends are of extraordinary significance to me, the American diplomat was quoted as saying. And even amid growing tensions, as recent U.S. administrations have grown increasingly alarmed by China's aggressive foreign policy and authoritarianism at home, Kissinger remained a strong advocate of positive engagement to avoid conflict. Kissinger last traveled to China in July, when the Biden administration was busy dispatching cabinet officials to the Chinese capital in an attempt to restore fractured communications ahead of a potential visit to the U.S. from Xi, which took place earlier this month. Bilateral relations had then plunged to a new low following the fallout from an alleged Chinese spy balloon and the high-level U.S. visit to Taiwan last summer. On his surprise visit to Beijing, Kissinger was granted a meeting with Xi, who hailed him as an old friend. That made him stand out from U.S. climate envoy John Kerry and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who traveled there on separate trips that same month and only met with their counterparts. In a statement Thursday, Chinese ambassador to the United States, Xi Feng, said he was deeply shocked and saddened to learn of Kissinger's passing. History will remember what the centenarian had contributed to China-US relations, and he will always remain alive in the hearts of the Chinese people as a most valued old friend, Xi said on social media X. Chinese state media highlighted Kissinger's friendship with China, noting that he visited the country more than 100 times over half a century. State broadcaster CCTV called him a living fossil, who witnessed the development of US-China relations. Many state-run outlets cited a glowing quote from Kissinger's interview with official news agency Xinhua in 2011. China is the country with which I have the longest and most in-depth contacts. China has become a very important part of my life. Chinese friends are of extraordinary significance to me, the American diplomat was quoted as saying. And even amid growing tensions, as recent U.S. administrations have grown increasingly alarmed by China's aggressive foreign policy and authoritarianism at home, Kissinger remained a strong advocate of positive engagement to avoid conflict. Kissinger last traveled to China in July, when the Biden administration was busy dispatching cabinet officials to the Chinese capital in an attempt to restore fractured communications ahead of a potential visit to the U.S. from Xi, which took place earlier this month. Bilateral relations had then plunged to a new low following the fallout from an alleged Chinese spy balloon and the high-level U.S. visit to Taiwan last summer. On his surprise visit to Beijing, Kissinger was granted a meeting with Xi, who hailed him as an old friend. That made him stand out from U.S. climate envoy John Kerry and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who traveled there on separate trips that same month and only met with their counterparts. Kissinger also met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who told him, U.S. policies toward China require Kissinger-style diplomatic wisdom and Nixon-style political courage. On that trip, Kissinger was held up in Chinese state media as an example of old friends diplomacy, according to Alfred Wu, an associate professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore, referring to China's practice of pointing to international figures who have contributed to positive, stable relations between their country and China. Chinese media very clearly tried to paint the picture that this is good diplomacy, and Kissinger is forward-looking and has goodwill for mitigating the tensions between two countries, and other current diplomats are not like Kissinger, said Wu, adding that Beijing was, in reality, not aiming to be a close friend of the U.S. in its own diplomacy. Kissinger, the Flying Tigers, all are part of the story of the U.S.-China relations, golden model, or good old days that Xi Jinping wants to promote, Wu said, referring to American pilots who helped China fight Japan during World War II, who were recently highlighted in state media coverage ahead of Xi's US visit. But among some Chinese intellectuals there are mixed feelings about Kissinger's legacy, with some saying he only tried to promote peace with China, and didn't have principles when it came to China's political realities, Wu added. Kissinger's coveted 1971 visit to China as Nixon's national security advisor followed more than 2 decades of hostility and almost no contact between the two countries. That trip, where he met Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, and a second visit that same year, paved the way for Nixon's own breakthrough trip the following February and the signing of the carefully worded Shanghai Communique, where both sides agreed to work toward normalizing relations. The tectonic shift in US-China relations that was formalized some 8 years later opened the door for extensive economic engagement starting from the early 1980s. It also shifted the balance of power in the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, experts say, by deepening a split between Moscow and Beijing. But getting there was a significant challenge. There were a variety of voices in the United States in the 1960s quietly calling for finding a path toward normalization with China. But it took very careful, wise diplomacy to actually implement and get that process rolling, said Kennedy at CSIS in Washington, pointing to both sides' management of key differences. 50 years later, Kissinger's brand of pragmatism and what experts describe as his efforts to put aside ideological differences for strategic purposes appears at odds with the recent trajectory of the US-China relationship. While Biden and Xi met earlier this month to ease tensions, the friendly public gestures belied the mistrust on both sides, with each seeing the other as seeking to use or co-opt the current world order in their favor. It's more difficult for the US and China to find a pragmatic balance because the domestic politics in both countries have shifted dramatically, said Kennedy. It's really hard to think today that we would have the US and others engage in that kind of creative diplomacy with China, and other countries with which we have the biggest differences, Kennedy added. That's what Kissinger was able to do. Conservationists have discovered 2 kiwi chicks in Wellington, the first wild births recorded for the bird in the New Zealand capital in over 150 years. The 2 new chicks come just a year after the Capital Kiwi project reintroduced the country's iconic national bird to the city of around 400,000 people. Their birth in Makara, a suburb just 25 minutes from Wellington's city centre, takes the local total to 65 North Island brown kiwi. The brown kiwi is one of New Zealand's most common kiwi species, but according to New Zealand's Department of Conservation, the birds could be extinct in the wild within 2 generations without adequate conservation and support. Another 18 brown kiwi chicks are expected to hatch as part of the Capital Kiwi project, which hopes to restore a large-scale wild population of kiwi to New Zealand's capital. The project plans to use transmitters to monitor the 2 new kiwi chicks as well as any others that hatch. The flightless birds, which once numbered around 12 million in New Zealand, have seen their population plummet to just 68,000, according to the Save the Kiwi charity. The charity is among approximately 90 kiwi conservation programs aiming to boost. In 1991, the New Zealand Department of Conservation launched the Kiwi Recovery Plan, which focused on predator control and community engagement. According to New Zealand's Department of Conservation, the country's kiwi population is declining at an average of 2% a year, mostly due to predators like stoats, cats, dogs and ferrets. 95% of wild-born kiwi in New Zealand are killed before they reach adulthood, according to Save the Kiwi. Really the only issue for an adult kiwi is roaming dogs. Where they get hammered is stoats eating the chicks before they get up to their fighting weight, Capital Kiwi project team leader Paul Ward told CNN earlier this year. Ward expressed optimism about the project, after the release of the 63 kiwi near Wellington last November, which marked the first time in about a century that wild kiwi have lived in the area.